138 Openings of Wisdom by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. This is opening 13, a reading and a meditation on opening 13. The numerical value of the words Li Segula, which comes from Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, V'hitem Li Segula, a treasured people, or some translate it as a peculiar people, or what it literally means is me a treasured. It's part of a verse. To me a treasure, or to me peculiar or special, any one of the above. It comes from the giving of the Torah when God's speaking to the nation of Israel. 138 equals Hatzlacha, which is success. And there's a connection between these two. And I think that's all I have in terms of gematria for now. But I think it applies to any one of God's people. It's not being ethnocentric, I would say. It's any human being, whether Jew or Gentile, who are part of God's people, would be considered Li Segula. And with that, we'll start the opening. Opening 13. The underlying spiritual forms, the circular and straight or upright form, general and individual providence. The underlying spiritual forms seen in prophecy show things in accordance with the nature of each particular forms as it actually appears in the lower world. Thus, the circle, igul, indicates an encompassing mode of government without differentiation in terms of kindness, judgment, and mercy, but rather like a general overall providence reflecting the distinctive quality of the particular sephirah seen in this form. This is from the standpoint of causal development, ishtalshalut. On the other hand, the straight or upright form, which is called yosher, indicates detailed government varying according to the requirements of kindness, judgment, and mercy, right, left, and center. The same approach applies to all the other forms seen in the prophetic vision. Having explained, in general terms, how the chariot appears in the prophetic vision, we will now begin to discuss some of the more basic details that need to be understood. First of all, is the general form in which the Sephirot appears, circular or upright. The proposition has two parts. Part 1, the spiritual forms. This discusses generally how the forms seen in the prophetic vision are to be understood. Part 2, thus the circle. This explains the circular and upright, linear schemas in which the Sephirot appear. Part 1. The spiritual forms seen in prophecy show things. We already know that the spiritual form or picture, temunah, that we are talking about is nothing but a light, he'ara, shining from Malchut, which shines in this particular way because Malchut is the root of the created or separate realms in which this form or picture is actually found. It follows that the prophetic vision must be interpreted accordingly. The prophetic image must be understood in accordance with the way the corresponding forms appears in the material world. We refer to the form seen in the prophetic vision as the underlying form, Sod HaTemunah. This is because in the prophetic vision, what is seen is not the physical form as it exists in the material world, but rather the spiritual root of this form, and thus we call it the underlying form. The way that the subject of prophecy must be understood is in accordance with the nature of each particular form as it actually appears in the lower world. This should now be quite clear. Part 2. Thus the circle, igul, indicates an encompassing government without differentiation in terms of kindness, judgment, and mercy. This is a general point that applies to all the Sefirot. They can all appear in both circular and straight or upright form. This is because, as a hierarchical order consisting of different levels, the Sefirot may be viewed either in terms of the causal chain through which one develops from another, or in terms of the way they actually govern. In terms of the way the 10 Sefirot manifest level by level, each successive Sephirah is caused by and develops from the one above it. In this aspect, it is of no relevance that one Sephirah inclines towards kindness, while another inclines towards judgment. For although in terms of government, kindness and judgment act in partnership, from the point of view of their development, judgment emerges from kindness. From the developmental viewpoint, each successive Sephirah is lower than the one above it, and the Sephirah of Gevurah, strength, develops out of Chesed, kindness. Thus the sages said, the waters conceived and gave birth to darkness. Medrash Rabbah, Exodus 15:22. In other words, kindness, symbolized by water, produced judgment, symbolized by darkness. From this point of view, the 10 Sefirot emerge as 10 levels, one below the other, because of the additional fact that every higher Sephirah bears and carries the Sephirah below it. We can picture them as one inside the other, like the skins of an onion. However, in terms of the way in which the worlds are governed, Hanhaga, Gevurah ascends and stands facing Chesed, while Tiferet, beauty, also rises and stands between them. Similarly, Hod, splendor, rises up and stands against Netzach, and so on in the same way. Thus, the government of the world's detail is ordered on the basis of the 3 lines of kindness, judgment, and mercy. Since the Supreme Will wanted to show these different aspects by means of the forms seen in the prophetic vision, he instituted these 2 forms, circles and the straight or upright form. The circles indicate the developmental chain through which the Sephirot emerge one from another, while the upright linear depiction indicates the governmental order in which the Sephirot are arranged along the 3 lines of kindness, judgment, and mercy. Matters relating to the causal and developmental interrelationship between the Sephirot must be understood from the circles, while matters relating to government must be understood through the linear depiction. From the developmental point of view, there is no difference at all between kindness and judgment. Kindness on the right, judgment on the left, or Gevurah, left-leaning, emerges from Chesed, right-leaning, and is beneath it, just as Netzach, right-leaning, emerges from Tiferet, center and beneath it. What this means is that when examining the developmental aspect, we do not take into account a particular Sephirah's action in terms of its own distinctive quality. Rather, we consider the level of this Sephirah in terms of how near to or far from the source it is. From this point of view, the distinctive qualities of this particular level are not evident in detail, but only in a general way as part of the overall providence. Thus, the underlying form of the circle is like a sphere that is completely round and does not divide into parts. For you cannot say it has a head, top, or beginning, or bottom, or end, or a middle, right, or left. When a circle is seen in the vision of the chariot, the immediate inference is that this is a radiation of light, he'ara, that shines in a general, undifferentiated way. It encompasses all the created realms and beings, and accordingly takes the form of an encompassing sphere or circle, inasmuch as it encompasses and shines to the entire existence contained within it without any differentiation. Thus, the Supreme Will maintains this lowly world in existence through a general providence which makes no differentiation between one species and another, or between one individual or another, but which encompasses all the created realms and beings equally. A thought that comes to mind is God reigns on the just and the unjust. Or God, I think God reigns on the unjust. I mean, He provides for. The form of the circle only indicates the way in which the light seen in this form shines down generally over all that exists within it. But what are the particular powers of this level? This is not the place for these to be revealed, but elsewhere, when the light appears in a different form, when that divides it into its different sides properly. Thus, the circular form indicates only a general providence and encompassing mode of government that does not divide into different sides or aspects in terms of kindness, judgment, and mercy. Nevertheless, even in the circular form, there is a difference between the qualities of each of the different circles. For this one is called Chachma, wisdom, this one Bina, understanding, and this one Da'at, knowledge. What this means is that all the Sefirot exercise a general providence over all that exists, and accordingly, everything that exists is under the providence of all of the 10 equally. These 10 kinds of providence are arranged hierarchically, with the providence of Keter, the crown, being the outermost of all of them and encompassing all of them. That of Chachma is inside that of Keter, and so on, in the same way down to the end. However, when we examine the actual government of the worlds, the Sefirot do not all act equally in this way, but each according to what is appropriate, depending on the time in question and in response to people's behavior. Thus, in terms of the government of the worlds, any one of the different component levels may or may not act at any given time, while its overall influence certainly continues when we consider the circular or developmental aspect. Like a general, like a general overall providence reflecting the distinctive quality of the particular Sephirah seen in this form. This is from the standpoint of causal development, Hishtal Shalut. On the other hand, the straight or upright form, Yosher, indicates detailed government varying according to the requirements of kindness, judgment, and mercy, right, left, and center. In other words, the different sides, right, left, and center, indicate kindness, judgment, and mercy. When there are different sides, we can measure the degree to which a given force extends, assess the relative power and quality of different forces, trace their effects, and make all the other distinctions that are discussed in relation to the Parsufim. Each Parsuf is an upright array of powers arranged along the lines of kindness, judgment, and mercy. The same approach applies to all the other forms seen in the prophetic vision. This should now be clear, because the information derived from the prophetic vision depends upon the nature of the forms seen, whether they be general or specific lights, whether they spread or do not spread. For example, each point is a root of light that stands above but does not extend below, while each line is a straight line that spreads or extends. The same applies to all the forms and likenesses seen in prophecy. What they signify above corresponds directly to the actual physical form signifies here below.